Andrew Brown Jr. Tonight, his family and lawyers say they were allowed to see just 20 seconds of police body camera footage today. Lawyers now say his hands were on the wheel and that he was shot in the back of the head. Authorities late today saying this whole incident was over in just 30 seconds. ABC Victor Kendrick now from North Carolina.
Tonight, calls for transparency growing alarm in the officer-involved killing of Andrew Brown Jr.
We only saw a snippet of the video.
The family and their legal counsel say they saw just 20 seconds of one body camera video, although multiple sheriff's deputies were involved.
Let's be clear. This was an execution. Andrew Brown was in his driveway. Andrew had his hands on his steering wheel. They ran up to his vehicle shooting.
It's like we're against all odds in this world. My dad got executed just by trying to save his own life.
Following days of peaceful protests and demands for transparency, Elizabeth City is now under a state of emergency in anticipation of the video's public release. According to the Pasquotank County Sheriff's Office, deputies and a local SWAT team were executing a search warrant at Brown's home Wednesday morning. In the application for the search warrant, authorities stated that they believe Brown was using his home to store, package, and distribute narcotics, and two vehicles to store, traffic, and distribute them. Brown's neighbor, Demetria Williams, claimed he was driving away when the deputies opened fire.
He's trying to get away. And they're actually shooting him.
Authorities have yet to say what led to the shooting, with Brown's attorney saying the sheriff's office told him Brown was unarmed and that no drugs were found in his car or in the house at the time. The sheriff has urged patience during the investigation.
Any of my deputies broke any laws or violated any policies to come out through this investigation.
Just have fun and keep your toys tucked away. But every now and then you're going to need it gets better and work for that too. This is actually a really economical makeover because we don't have to change the outfit. We don't have to change the trend. It's really special being a part of an organization like this because it's not
Our Mistress of the Ritz by Melanie Benjamin and the Hosting Stage, and The One Constant during the 4-year Nazi occupation of Paris from June 1940 through August 1944. Why did I choose two books on the same subject? I had read a review of Moseo's book somewhere, probably the back of a Brandeis or a Hadassah magazine, and became intrigued. I'll tell you why in a minute. If you can mute yourselves, I hear some background noise. If you're not speaking. Thank you. When I began to explore, I found the two books and I couldn't decide on one over the other, so I read both. I read the nonfiction book first, Mistress of the Ritz. It seemed like an easier read and no subject matter background was needed to follow along. When I first looked at the Moseo book, there seemed to be a lot of characters from the get-go. In fact, the author provides a whole glossary of the characters up front, and I felt I would benefit from an introduction to some of the characters before starting that one. Why did this particular World War II subject catch my interest? It begins with my Uncle William Shamban of blessed memory. He was the third of 4 boys and my father's next older brother. My father and my uncle were close, so we knew him well. Although Bill brought his family to Los Angeles and we remained in the Boston area, the brothers kept in touch. Both of them went to MIT. My father began at age 16 and dropped out at 18 to fight in the war. My uncle, a few years older, finished college, became an engineer, and went on to build an aerospace company with offices in several countries. One of the countries was France and the city Paris. I lived in Paris from 1984 to 1985, and I would see him there when he came to visit the Paris office. He always, always, always stayed at the Ritz on the Place Vendôme. This is a picture in front of the Ritz. This was the winter of 2016. And these are two beautiful photos of the Ritz around Christmas time. He never stayed anywhere else. I had no clue about the hotel's wartime history, but wish I had, so I could have asked him questions and talked about it with him. I wonder if he even knew the whole Ritz story. I've been back to Paris about 5 times since then. One of my trips was with his daughter, my cousin, in December of 2016. In Bill's honor, we went to the bar at the Ritz to have a drink and make a toast. When I came across these books last year, I just had to read them both. This is myself and my cousin Ava in front of the Ritz. And then on the right is where we went with another friend to have a drink and in his honor. So if you were able to read the books, it probably didn't look quite like this. It was actually quite small. I imagine that it wasn't so small in World War II because the books take place in the bar and it sounded like it was a very big place. But I was actually there. So I thought it'd be a nice picture to show. Now to the books. Mistress of the Ritz introduces us to our main characters, Blanche and Claude Ozello, in the 1920s, 15 years before the occupation. Blanche Ross was an outgoing American, a flapper, a rule breaker, and an aspiring actress dating a rich Egyptian prince. Blanche Ross was the stage name she used in the US and the one that was on her false passport. She followed the prince to Paris along with a friend trying to break into the movie business. Claude was a romantic, a fiercely proud and loyal man. He is traditional in many ways, conservative, dutiful, regimented, well-dressed, and immensely proud of being French. Claude disdained most foreigners even before the war. He felt the Americans were too loud and too crude. But when he and Blanche met, he fell in love with his American beauty Rose, as unsophisticated as she was to him. Claude fights to win her hand and bring Blanche over to his world and to his mistress, one of 2 mistresses, the Ritz Hotel. This takes Blanche away from her world and into his, and it changes the course of her life forever. Of the many things Claude teaches Blanche is that there are Jews and there are Jews. For example, the Rothschilds, investors of the Ritz, were acceptable. However, there had to be a low quota of Jewish guests at the hotel to keep the other guests comfortable. This he thought was just like New York, where Blanche came from. There are Guggenheims, and then there are the rest of the Jews. The characters, all real people, continue to unfold in both books, many of them in more detail in the Talar book than in Benjamin's, which is more anecdotal. In addition to information we glean about the Dreyfus affair, we meet Blanche's horrible and anti-Semitic rival, Coco Chanel, the wife of the Ritz founder, Marie-Louise Ritz, the suave and 007 type bartender spy, Frank Mayer, and Lily Karbayev, the resistance queen and secretive friend of Blanche, who was a real person, but also to me, a representation of the underground in Paris in which Blanche, and we find out later, Claude, become deeply involved. The hotel is not just a hotel. It's a residence where the rich, famous, and military live for years. The building seems to be the patent place of occupied France, filled with a cadre of German officers and soldiers who take up residence in the hotel. Fascinating among the staunch German Nazi loyalists living there included Hermann Göring and the 2 cousins who orchestrated the failed Operation Valkyrie, anti-fascists who tried to assassinate Hitler. Unfortunately, they lost. The craziest mix of people circulated in the bar at the oddest hours, and alcohol was aplenty. They circulated at night and in and out of each other's rooms at night as well. This cadre included Nazis, undercover spies, regular residents, and a wide array of artists, writers, and war correspondents that came and went before and after the war, including Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Cole Porter, Robert Capa, Martha Gellhorn, Pablo Picasso, Marlene Dietrich, and Sarah Bernhardt, to name a few. Mistress of the Ritz is a story of many things. Claude and Blanche's turbulent love affair, the horrible realities of the Nazi regime, the cry of the desperate people of Paris and the rest of Europe, and a story of courage, risking everything and enduring physical and mental torture to help the resistance and for Blanche and Lily to be caught. Hotel in the Place Vendôme takes us into the Ritz in a different way, not starting through a turbulent love affair, but through the multitude of characters we've discussed and the presentation of hard facts. Mazeo jumps around quite a bit in the book, so as not to miss one person or one thread. She goes into much more detail about the resistance work that both Blanche and Claude do to try to defeat the Germans, rescue others, win back their city, their country, and their lives. When reading about the suffering that Blanche endured and from which she never really recovered, the brutal facts of war and resistance are laid out graphically and makes me shudder to think about what Blanche and others had to endure. I know many of us wonder what we would have done and what we could have endured had we been in the same circumstances. The description of Blanche, broken, physically and mentally shattered, was painful to read. Melanie Benjamin wrote her book after Tillars. In fact, she was so intrigued with Blanche and Claude, she wanted to further develop their relationship in her writing, and that was the reason for her book. Both books share with us the tragic ending of their lives. Blanche and Claude could not escape the long shadow of the war's suffering arms, and in May of 1969, 25 years after the Nazi occupation of Paris, Claude shot and killed his beloved Blanche in her sleep and then killed himself. Blanche Ross, born Blanche Rubenstein, had already suffered enough. So with that, I wanted to get your feedback, what your thoughts were on one book versus the other, if you had a chance to read both or just the one, and what lessons you think we have to learn from them.
Jill,
Yes.
the one thing I just wanted to comment on is I understand the torture that Blanche went through, but I can't see how her husband could kill her, even though, and I think part of it is he was suffering because he was no longer going to be the manager of the hotel. I just thought that was rather very, very tragic, to have taken her life and then his own.
Extremely tragic, extremely tragic. And then when I got to the end of the book, I was shocked. I didn't see that coming at all. I don't know if anybody else did, but I know Susan Boyd has her hand up. Thank you, Linda.
Mhm.
Now, Linda, if he was going to kill her, he should have done her that favor before the Nazis took her away.
Well, there was, talk about the gun in the drawer, and there were times when it got very tense between them. Yeah.
What I wanted to say was that my stepfather, Guy Golden, was shot down over north of Paris late in the war. And all the men from his plane, except one, were able to get their parachutes on and land. They were immediately scooped up by the French resistance. They took those parachutes and they hid them or buried them. And the men they changed their clothes, and they were all taken to different locations where they were hidden. Then they had to be, it was a year before the war was over, so they had to be moved from place to place. Once he was in a hospital playing like he was sick, once he was in a school teacher's house, and the Nazis were right below. Once he was in a farmer, and he had to wear farmer clothes and act like he was deaf and mute. He just, and from place to place, they never had enough food. He suffered greatly, and all of the men did. And then when it was after D-Day, all of the pilots and the men from the airplane, all over around Paris, there were like 300 of them. They were all secretly taken to a forest south of Paris, where they hid for the remainder of the war until the army came marching through. And he was on duty the day that the tanks rolled in, and they thought it was the Nazis, and they looked, and there was an American flag. There was a young man standing up in the turret of the tank, and he happened to be from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where my Guy Golden, my stepfather, was from, and they played basketball together in high school.
Oh my God.
They were all saved, and they were medically looked after, and then they sent them all back into the war.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that story.
Thanks
Teresa,
for listening.
what'd you say?
Thanks for listening.
I was just reacting. That's amazing, Susan. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Susan went back a couple years ago to, wasn't there like a big cemetery?
It was
people remembering, and you
yeah,
and Bill went
it was
back.
a big celebration of the anniversary of the men of the forest, and the people in the town were so grateful, and they invited either if there was anyone still living or their families to come, and we were treated like rock stars. They had a monument, they had a band, they had a museum, they had dinner. We got to go to dinner with a duke. It was just fabulous, and it was my stepfather, it wasn't me, but just because I was one of his family, they treated us like that. They gave everybody, the mayor of the town, short, fat French guy with a ribbon across him, he gave everybody a kiss on each cheek and gave us a little vial of dirt from the forest. And then the scouts had gone into the forest and recreated how the men lived, like making huts out of branches and tables out of wood. And it was all for us to go in and see what our family had done. It was incredible.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Anita?
One of the things I was going to comment on, and I love Susan's story and the personalization, because, it's so interesting to me that, a lot of us can connect to different stories that, of things that have gone on. And I read a lot of historical fiction and a lot of books around that same time and fiction. So you can relate to it. But in terms of the book, the fictional piece, I was very, very shocked towards the end when Lily was still alive. It was like such a surprise to me that she was still alive, because Blanche had just sacrificed everything for her friend and refused to give up her name and to give up her identity. And she was the true prisoner of war. My name, my rank, my serial number, that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say anything else. And she was so loyal to her as a friend until the end. And to find that Lily was still alive and never approached her or thanked her, it was just it was very, very shocking to me that it was the most shocking part probably of the entire book for me.
There are so many stories within stories within stories in these books. Goldie? Thank you, Anita.
You're welcome.
So speaking of stories and secrets, I was particularly struck that Blanche and Claude did not realize that each of them were working in the underground. And I think about relationships, and I think about connections between people who make lifetime commitments to each other. And I think it struck me as, in a way that I hadn't before, about how incredibly difficult it must have been to live at a time when you have no idea who you can trust. Even your life partner, you aren't quite sure that you can trust that person either. And or if you share your secret, then you have put your life partner at tremendous risk. We
Yeah,
should never know.
that's right. That's right. I agree. Anybody else who read it have any comments? Does it make you want to read any more books by either of these two authors, or have you read other books by these two authors?
The Aviator's Wife is a good read.
Yeah, that's Melanie Benjamin, right?
Yeah. I too like historic fiction. I think she's good.
Yeah.
But very readable.
There are also stories about the women reporters. It was very unusual for a woman to go to war, to be a war correspondent. And most of them did it on their own, and their newspaper was not behind them. They didn't want them to go anywhere close. They could stay on the boat, but you couldn't go out. And one of them got in with the nurses, and she helped the nurses, and that's how she got there. And she actually landed with the military on D-Day.
They were competitive. I thought it was interesting too, reading about Hemingway's wife, but you talk about the Brits, and Hemingway, for some reason, it just was used the term, he wanted to liberate the Brits. He wanted to be the one to do it, and somehow that building was an importance in his mind, a symbol of something that was really kind of out of proportion to, you think about liberating a country or liberating something, but he wanted to liberate the Brits and he wanted to be first.
Yes, very competitive. And then a lot of the war correspondents, then they go to war, the female ones, and then they all marry Ernest Hemingway. I mean, he married Martha Gellhorn, and then he was married to another correspondent, and he was married to a nurse. So he gets around. And I'm watching, there's a PBS series, a 4-part series. So it's a total of 8 hours, Ken Burns on Hemingway. It's very slow, but it's interesting, right? Goldie's got her thumbs up. Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Yeah. So these books, I mean, the writing styles are so totally different. I mean, you can't compare. But I think it was interesting with Talara Mazea was that she couldn't leave one stone unturned. It was like you really had to pay attention because she kept going down these, I don't know if they're rabbit holes, but different detours. So in a way, I don't know if it's great writing, but in a way you really do learn so much about all the goings on and all the different characters. And some of it's just unbelievable. And the amount of alcohol and people sleeping together and the betrayals with the French women and the Germans. And then at the end, they ended up on the losing side. So, and I think you learn things that I never would have known otherwise, like the part when, I forget exactly how it went, but the Americans, I think, were coming over with planes, and Blanche knew that. So she went and turned, when it was supposed to be blackout, she turned the kitchen lights on so they could see.
Basement lights.
Right, and keeping that secret too. And also, I did not know anything about Coco Chanel, but
I didn't either.
And then it turns out that She cheated her Jewish partner out of the business
Mhm.
because she could. Because she could. So, did anybody know or gather early on that Blanche was Jewish?
Oh, yeah.
You did? At what point? Do you remember?
Well, I think doesn't she say it early on in the story? Doesn't she? Don't we find out? It's been a long time. I read the books. It's been a few months now.
I don't know. I think they hint around it, but I thought it was later in the book when they keep.
I thought it was in the beginning of the book that when she came and took her a while to say what is her last name because she had really a Jewish last name and she changed it, and that's how the owner of the, that's how she came to the hotel without any problem. But I believe in the beginning when she registered and then something else, and she gave immediately the false name, and this came kind of accidentally without thinking. I think something she saw it and she kind of connected it together.
And evidently that bartender knew the whole time. Wasn't he something, the Jewish bartender that did all the false passports and so on? And since he did that for her, he obviously knew.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I mean, when you think about it, it almost seems made up. It's hard to believe that it's all true. And I'm sure it's just one tiny cosmic place at that time. And I'm sure there's gazillions and gazillions of stories like that, but it is hard to believe.
Jill, I thought it was amazing near the end when she's taken by the Nazis and she wants to save Lily and she keeps saying, I'm the one who's Jewish. I'm the Jewish one. But they wouldn't believe her. They wouldn't believe her.
That's true. That's true. Susan?
I learned a lot more about the Duke and Duchess of Windsor than I knew before. I had heard that he was a Nazi and that she was, but I didn't realize how much involved there were and how fortunate England was that he gave up the throne for the woman he loved, because otherwise they would have had a Nazi king.
And I always thought of them as being such a loving, devoted couple, but evidently not. She sure sounded like she was sleeping around. Well, you do, the king that gives up the throne for the woman he loves, and it always, gives her all this fabulous jewelry, and you think about them living happily ever after. And Susan's right, I was surprised too, like, really, that's really what the relationship was like. Who knew, what a PR cover-up that was.
I think it's really interesting that everybody's picking up on different parts of the story, and I really appreciate that. Susan? Susan? Oh, Susan, your hand was up. Okay, sorry. Goldie, go ahead.
Well, so reading the book gave new sort of understanding to me about the concept of hiding in plain sight. There were so many people who, so many characters who I thought I knew which side they were on, but then I was confused and wrong. And I found it fascinating how people could maneuver in the society and manage to move their position forward. And lots of other people not realizing what side of the table they were sitting on.
Right, exactly. Anybody else?
I really like that you compared the two books. I don't think we've done that before, and it was very interesting to have the factual book and then to read a fiction book about the same topic. I enjoyed
Yeah.
that.
Which one did
I
you read first?
appreciate your having told me to read the novel first. I don't think I would have gotten through the nonfiction if I had started with that. But having read the novel first, then I became more interested.
Familiar with it. Yeah, thank you. I found that too. In fact, Museo has a couple of other books that look really interesting to me, but I don't know because this was it was dark, I thought it was dark. Informative but dark and chock full. But the one about the widow, what is it? The widow Clicquot, about the Champagne dynasty. The widow Clicquot, and she has a secret of Chanel number 5, which is probably about Coco Chanel and the Nazis, right?
Mhm.
It's probably very interesting, but probably pretty depressing. Yeah. What were some of the other characters that appealed to people, or even just the genre? Nope. Okay. Karen?
You're muted.
From you, Karen.
No, you're muted.
I did read The Aviator's Wife, but I haven't gotten to these, but I did want to recommend another book that's the same time period. It's called The Paris Library, and it's about the American library that exists in Paris and how they kept it going through the war and provided books to Jews who could no longer go into the library and so forth. And it's fiction, but it was very interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So the appeal to me was the story in France and in Paris. And it's such a phenomenal city. There's so much to see and do there. But like many cities in Europe, it was blown up, destroyed. And there's a picture, I don't know if you've read the book, it's a classic picture. It's a Frenchman crying as the Nazis occupy Paris. It's a very famous photo, and it just kind of expresses the dismay of what was happening in the moment. And another thing was amazing to me was that if you lived or stayed in the Ritz, life was no different for you. You ate and you drank and you had the fanciest food and you dressed up for dinner and you partied all night. So it was just amazing to me that they could still pull that off. And they don't really tell you how they do that, but they do.
Sounded like they had plenty stashed away. Plenty. I mean, wine and all kinds of things that they hid, just for the duration. I didn't realize too, I guess I never thought about it, but one of the reasons that the Ritz kind of was able to remain a neutral facility was because the owners were Swiss. And with Switzerland being a neutral nation, it kind of helped the building in Paris having Swiss owners.
Yep, that's a really good point. Anita?
One of the things that comes to mind, and when we talk about Paris and books set in Paris and what was going on before the war and after the war and during the war, that it's been a seat of anti-Semitism for a very, very long time, way before World War II and way before the Nazis moved into Paris. Jews were looked down upon and were really not really trusted. And so this kind of continues that story, because even at the beginning, before the Nazis show up, there's that apprehension about which Jews that you allow to stay at the hotel, which ones you don't. There's that feeling of not good enough. The very wealthy ones are fine, but the rest are not really up to our standard. And And today, you know, France has some of the worst anti-Semitism in the entire world. You can't freely walk around with your Jewish star and feel okay. And it's a different, it's some historical and some because they have a very, very large Muslim population. And I think that it's sad. I mean, I've been there and it's a beautiful city and this, you know, there's just so much history and so much to offer, but it's kind of scary that it has so much roots in bad blood and bad, you know, and making Jewish people feel uncomfortable.
Renee?
Yes. I too, I'm very, very sensitive about anti-Semitism, and reading this book, you know, we all read and visualize and see different things. To me, the anti-Semitism, the role of women at that time, which still continues, the anti-Semitism still continues. Even today, I believe I read in France, in Paris, there's so much anti-Semitism at this time. What changes? They can't even convict where they murdered, I can't think of her name now. Sarah, yes, Halemi. They can't even convict the murderers that beat her to death and threw her out a window. This is today. And as I read that, I say, what has changed? What is different? And it's so sad to me. I don't know. I hate to speak like this in a group like this, because I just have a difficult time dealing with so many things about the Ritz, how they were able to give up the Jews and still carry on, as you say. Would I want to go there? Would I want to go there if I had the opportunity? Would I want to walk into the Ritz-Carlton?
That's what I say. I didn't know, and I wish I knew so I could have talked to my uncle and see if he had known. But Goldie and then Sophia.
I was going to ask you a somewhat personal question, Jill, which you're welcome to say I don't want to talk about it. And that is, in your trips to Paris, did you feel uncomfortable? Did you sense the anti-Semitism? Did you see it?
No, I've never sensed, I'm not saying it's not there. I'm sure it's there. I have never sensed it or felt it when I've been there.
Yeah. I'm a little bit with Renee. I'm not sure I even want to go. And I realize that I'm passing up a tremendous amount of history and art and culture, and I'm leaving that all by the wayside. But I'm hesitant.
Yeah, my last trip, I think 2018, my cousin, her son, he met a girl in Barcelona. She's a French Jew. Her father's Israeli and her mother's French. And they fell in love, and he went there to get his PhD. So I went over with my cousin for his dissertation. And we had a big Shabbat dinner at their house, and it was wonderful. But the data bear out what you are saying, because I don't have the numbers, but thousands of Jewish people from France have either moved to Israel or bought second homes in Israel. That's how threatened they feel, that they need to have that to go to, or they've already gone.
Goldie, I can tell you, both of my grandmothers, who are long gone, when you think about my age, always described the French as being nafkas. You know, they did not like the French even back then. They never did. Didn't trust them, didn't like them. And I can remember my first trip to Europe, which was after college. When I graduated from college, I went that summer to Europe. And they told me all these places that I shouldn't go. You know, one of them was under one of the arches in Rome where Jews marched, as captured people and so on. But the French were right in there with all those places where you shouldn't go. Speaking of Nafkas, there was one phrase that made me laugh out loud. I mean, you gotta love the way French described things in some ways. And one of them, you were talking about all the ladies of the evening, the prostitutes who were sleeping with the Germans. And I can't remember the exact phrase, but it was something like the femme horizontales or something like that was the way they described them.
Yes.
I thought that was such a funny description.
Sophia?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I met quite a few uh, French Jews. One of them I met not in France. It was when I was visiting Poland, and we went to one of those touristy places, and we had to park to put some money in, and it was a little bit different. And I'm reading because that's my native language, but I couldn't. And somebody came and he tried to help me. Well, anyway, no, I came to him and asked him, and he, of course, tried to help me, except we could not communicate because he was from France and spoke only French, and I expected him in Poland to speak Polish. And then we kind of, he knew a little bit Hebrew, so we spoke Hebrew. Well, anyway, so he started to tell me half in Hebrew and half whatever. I mean, we communicated more with hands rather than. And he was crying. He said how bad it is, and how that they were thinking of going now to Israel, to immigrate to Israel. And apparently in Israel they have a lot of French Jews. There is in Netanya almost every other person, which is north of Tel Aviv, every other person is Jewish there. I mean, they speak even the signs are in Hebrew and of course Arabic and French instead of English. That's how it's working. And
Yeah.
yeah, and then I know somebody, but I don't keep in touch with her because she's a friend of a friend on a tour, and she was in from Paris, though not originally, and she was saying that, and she loved it. She was born in Israel, came to Poland because her parents were from Poland. So we spoke Polish, but then she met in Israel. She met her husband from France, and they immigrated, and they have some business. I don't remember what kind of a business and so on. But anyway, she loved it, and this was like about 4 or 5 years ago. Before this, maybe longer than that. Well, before the anti-Semitism in France came about, because there is always, but not the way it's right now. And yeah, and I asked her, and she said, "Oh no, nothing." So some people don't see it.
Yeah, that's true. Lee, you were going to say something?
Yes, you were talking about not going to France because of the anti-Semitism. I'll give you a little story that my husband Jules was stationed in Darmstadt, Germany, right after the end of the war for 1 year. And he found that he traveled quite extensively all around Europe. When he came back home, he was extolling all the wonderful places he had been and seen. When we started our plans for traveling and going to Europe every year, he always wanted to take me back to Darmstadt, plus many of the other sites he had seen, and I wouldn't go. We wanted to plan a cruise down the Danube and see all of the countries along the way down to the very south. I wouldn't go. I said I could not touch any part of Germany after what had happened, and I remembered it so vividly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm heartbroken because we didn't do it, but I know I couldn't have gone through there.
I've never been to Germany either, Lee.
Yeah, I still won't go.
No.
All these years, every year, he kept saying, let's plan a wonderful trip down there. We can do that. You'll love it. I said, no, I can't go. I just couldn't go. And I'm sorry now in a way, but listen,
You did what you thought was best at the time.
I just didn't have the heart for it. I remembered what had gone on during the war. I could not do it.
I understand. Thank you for sharing that. My mother, who is, don't tell her I told you, but she'll be 95 this summer. And when I tell her what I've read and the book report, the review that I kept calling it, I was at my grandkids' house the other day helping them with school, so I called it a book report. But anyway, when we talk about it, she'll say, we didn't know. And I was like, it's okay, Mom, so it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. Yeah. Renee?
I guess I would go to France for the museums, which I have done. So on that note, but would not stay at the Ritz-Carlton. What I did want to say, and I had the book here and I went to look for this. Throughout history, we have all heard and read signs, no Jews allowed, no dogs or Jews allowed, however low they want to make the Jewish people like we are not human. Melanie Benjamin wrote in this book, I had to just stop and read it again, and I'd like to read it to you, where they're describing the Jews. Some collections of cells, combinations of bones and flesh, pulsing blood, beating hearts, weren't people at all. In other words, we all possess that, but because we are Jews, we are not. It's just so difficult for me.
Very powerful. I know. Thank you, Renee. It's really difficult. Tough stuff. It really is.
I'll say one other thing.
Please.
In today's world, I don't want to bring up another subject, but I'm going to. The blacks have taken over the role that the Jews had been condemned to. And that's what we're having in this country today. I don't think you see as much anti-Semitism. It's just there, maybe hidden, because right now the country is after the blacks. There has to be a scapegoat in any era. And that's what we have to live through, but we have to be able to learn to fight it at the same time.
You're here. Renee?
We are the oldest scapegoat in history.
Right.
And sadly, there are Jews killed in Brooklyn, New York. There are incidences all over the world. We don't hear about that. That upsets me as well.
Yes.
And we as Jews do not come together and say, this is not right. And
why?
See, I agree with
is the
Renee.
social justice more for other people than for the Jews? I don't get it.
Well, this certainly stirs up a lot of very deep feelings, of course, because of the subject matter. And I'm with a very thoughtful group of intelligent Jewish women, and it's greatly appreciated. I'm going to let Sophia have the last word, and I'm going to let her give you a clue as to our next book club and the date.
Okay, I don't know if I believe it's on May 17th at the same time, and it is called Moses in I'm sorry, not Moses. I'm reading now.
Azusa in the Madonna's
Oh,
foot.
it is
Madonna's
mezuzah in Madonna's foot. Yeah, it's a funny. I read this because I saw the title and I thought, oh, I have to see it. So, well, anyway, but what I wanted to say about, you mentioned about blacks and so on. I agree with Renee. I feel that the African American, because I cannot say black anymore, African American, they know how to unite, and the Jews do not. They are fighting the fight, and we are not. We see each other in different light or different way, and we don't see, there is no unity. And in some ways, I do admire how if anything happens to one person, everybody, let's say in Black community, everybody stands up and protests. You don't see this with Jews.
That's right.
But we're people who don't want to call attention to ourselves unless we win Nobel Prizes or our companies create vaccines for COVID or something like that. I mean, we're more people who were taught, don't do anything to stick out. You're Jews. Don't call attention to yourself. You're Jews. You know, and then somebody, well, you know, somebody's a serial killer and you think, please let him not be Jewish, that kind of thing.
100%.
I mean, big Ghana, Epstein, whatever. We're ashamed as a people. And you're right. I mean, we don't want to do anything to stick out unless it's for something outstanding. And then people look and say, oh, you're bragging. So I don't know. Is there a happy medium? I guess we haven't found it yet.
A sad story. Lisa said to me, so this Jewish star is actually reversible and it's magnetic. So I wore this tonight to be with you and to talk about this subject, but it actually goes like that. And when I'm out, that's how I wear it.
Wow.
Hold it up.
Yeah.
Out of
Hold
fear.
it up. Hold it up. Can't see it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Up under your chin more.
Yeah.
What does it say?
It's a Jewish star. It's magnetic.
And on the other side?
And then when I wear it out, I pull it out, which is really sad. Let me let my dog out of the office.
It looks probably, to me, it looks like a zigzag. But then you put it together and the points stick out.
Yeah, I mean, I know there are lots of people that wear their Jewish stars, but I have a really hard time doing it. I just get nervous. I don't hide the fact that I'm Jewish. I'll talk about it, whatever, but I just, anyway, the symbol makes me nervous. Renee, and then we only have a couple more minutes.
I just wanted to ask you, Jill, did you get that Jewish star in the Judaica shop at the temple?
I didn't. Do you sell them?
I did. That's why I was asking. I was trying to remember anyhow. Just
When
a
I
commercial at this point in time.
When I first moved here, there was a Jewish Women's Bowling League and I wasn't working. So I was looking to meet people. So I can't bowl, but, and then somebody was selling them. So I bought it there, but yes, they have them. So at the Judaica shop. So I want to thank you very much for everybody, for all of you. I appreciate you being here. And Wednesday night at 7, we have the most marvelous speaker, Rabbi Larry Kotuk. He's talking this week about how Islam came out of Judaism. Last week, he talked about Christianity and Judaism. He's a great speaker. He's so didactic. It was wonderful and chock full. So I encourage you all to join us at 7 on Wednesday night as well.
Thank you, Jill. This was a
Thank
wonderful,
you.
interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
What time on
7 o'clock.
7 or 8?
7.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Good night,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for all your participation.
Thank you so much.